right. Welcome everybody to D20 Foundation Session 3. Before we start off with what we're going to be going through today, I do want to have a short introduction from one of our panelists, Elvie, specifically about our partner organization that we're highlighting, the Future of Congo. So let me share that with you, and then please, Elvie, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikos, and also thank you to the Decoloniality Network for partnering and highlighting the future of Congo throughout all of the sessions that we'll be going through for pretty much the next month. So the Future of Congo is a Congolese-led organization, nonprofit, registered both in the US and in Congo. And we work primarily to empower displaced communities and vulnerable populations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So much of our work is situated in Eastern Congo. As you all may be aware of, a lot of the conflict that occurs when we talk about freeing Congo and the Genocost that's occurring in Congo, it's primarily situated in North Kivu and South Kivu. And so next slide, please, Nikos. And so a lot of our work is concentrated on direct efforts, direct action on the ground through extended relief aid. As you can see, one of the projects that we conducted right after M23 invaded Goma and pushed so many displaced people outside of that humanitarian hub that Goma was. They were forced to go back to homes that had already been destroyed, and they had no provisions, no transportation money. So one of the projects that we did at the time was providing them with enough essentials that would last them for a few months so they wouldn't have to worry about their basic necessities as they were going back to their homes in an attempt to rebuild. Next slide, please, Nikos. And so one project that we just recently completed was the reconstruction of the Matcha Institute. And so this institute was was a school in the Sake region that was bombed right at the start of M23's invasion in late January. And so currently, right now, we're just putting the finishing touches on the school. So that means, building the desks and everything. And so the 7 classrooms now will have a capacity to serve over 600 students. And next slide, please, Nikos. Thank you. And the new project that we have that's just recently emerging is developing a community center in the city of Beni. And so this is a city that is a little bit less known. It borders Uganda, and it's primarily affected by ADF, which is an extremist group, armed group that does pretty much the same function as M23 in that it wreaks havoc in an attempt to extract mineral resources and then funnel them to Western corporations and Western nations. So in order to address the isolation that a lot of these cities surrounding Goma experience, we wanted to build this community center so individuals in that area will have more provisions, will have the basic necessities, as again, all the areas within Eastern Congo are attempting to rebuild their lives. So we really wanted to focus on the basic necessities. And next slide, please, Nikos. And so if you would like to learn more about the future of Congo, if you would like to see other works and activities that we do on the ground in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter, where you can see more of our activities and you can be kept up to date on any new campaigns that we have emerging. And final slide. So I just wanted to say thank you to, again, the Decoloniality Network for partnering with the Future of Congo. All of our work is sustained through a mutual aid model. And so we do receive direct donations from the people, and that really allows us to be able to do what it is that we wish to do and really directly address the needs of the people first. So we always do assessments with our different activities. We go to the direct cities and sites, and we get an understanding and a survey of what it is that they're most in need of at that time. And from there, we carry out the work. So thank you again, everyone, for allowing me to speak a little bit about the future of Congo.
Thank you so much, Elvie. So now please, Sophia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elvie, and we look forward to hearing more from you a little later. But thank you everyone for joining this session on naming the now, power, resistance, and the global present. For those of you who are just joining this series for the first time, this session is part of a wider conference called Decolonial 20 or D20, which offers an alternative platform for discourse alongside the G20 as different political leaders are gathering to center people of the global majority, ancestral wisdom, and decolonial futures. And it's organized by the Decoloniality Network. So, in today's session, we'll be digging into some expansive themes linked to the discourse. We're seeing more now on the idea of this global polycrisis emerging, or just that the nature of risks we face are, increasingly interconnected, uncertain, and existential, with topics like climate change and AI in particular often core to this, as things having the potential, to tip us over the edge into catastrophic futures or maybe more flourishing ones, depending on our decisions today. So personally, having engaged with work dealing with risk and anticipating different futures and some of my roles with the UN, one reason I personally was drawn to foresight and futures work was because of the ways it can often invite conversations about the present and our past in new ways. For us to consider, more seriously what got us to where we are today. And when we think about the future, whose futures are we collectively working towards or validating as the end goal or horizon of our efforts? And whose knowledges and epistemological frameworks dictate the ways that we come to understand what is needed to create better futures. And I think, the more interconnected and uncertain the crises we face, and the more tools at our disposal to either combat or deepen them, like I think the more urgent these questions become. How we understand the contours of our past and the ways that those threads play out in the present will ultimately be what we take into our future. And I think, too often we carry forward unjust and harmful systems in large part because we take them as givens, whether those be the ones that govern our economic models or our relationship to the environment or different hierarchies that dictate policy decisions, rather than actually taking time to pause and engage with them as models that can be deconstructed and imagined differently. So this is a bit of what I hope we can get into today with our speakers who are doing work across narrative change, community-rooted collective action, emerging technologies, tackling issues from, as mentioned, conflict and displacement to ecological collapse, and kind of having this array of experiences to also ground what might otherwise be a more high-level abstract discussion in some specific cases of what it can look like to resist norms that treat people, land, knowledge, and life as extractable or transactional data, or that treat our social, ecological, and economic crises as separate phenomena. And in particular, as the session description kind of talks about, it would be great if we unpack some of what the different ontologies inherited from legacies of colonialism and imperialism look like, and consider what imagining decolonial futures might mean, and also whether that can help us, offer some frameworks or principles for navigating our own work in whatever spheres we operate in. And just on this point, I also wanted to quickly offer like a definition or basic orientation to what we mean with the word decolonial in this context, noting, of course, this is nuanced and there's many definitions, but I know sometimes language can feel exclusionary when we aren't feeling like we're on the same page. So just one I appreciated that was quoted from Maldonado Torres in an earlier session is about coloniality, referring to long-standing patterns of power that emerged as a result of colonialism, but that define culture, labor, intersubjectivity relations, and knowledge production. And a definition of decoloniality I've seen is also this stance or approach that seeks to rediscover, revalidate, and restore Indigenous knowledge, cultural values, social and economic structures that have been displaced or suppressed by colonialism. So, these points about marginalized knowledges and values, including as they pertain to relationships to other people and non-human life, I think are helpful for considering the work of decoloniality in today's conversation, including about where we go with AI, technology, and ecological repair. So overall, what we hope you'll take from this discussion might include insights into ways of navigating the world we live in, new questions maybe to be asking yourself or others, directions for inquiry that might deepen your understanding of how to kind of unpack harmful patterns and mindsets in the systems around you. And also just highlighting this work as at once long-term and maybe about creating systems that don't yet exist, but also about how we still address the immediate harms of the crises playing out before us. So I really encourage everyone to also, on that point, contribute to the future of Congo that was highlighted as one powerful avenue for doing some of that immediate work. Um, for today, we have 2 hours together, and this first hour will entail some sharing from our speakers and a panel discussion to get deeper into the themes. And then in the second half, we've made plenty of space to engage with each other, which I think is really where a lot of insight and inspiration comes from. And just to note, there will be a short breakout group at one point that we really encourage everyone to participate in, and then more open space for exchange as a larger group. But to start us off, I'm excited that we have Tolu here, who will be leading us through a short somatic session to kind of ground us in the moment. And just on that, I also wanted to share a quote I recently saw from Tanya Shuker, who notes that colonialism thrives on disembodiment. To maintain a culture of dominance and extraction, it separates the mind from the body and the body from nature and community. So with that, I think the work Tolu is doing in this space is really relevant also to today's conversation. But with that, I'll hand it to you, Tolu.
Thank you, Sophia. Hi, everyone. Good morning from Houston, Texas, where I'm based at the current moment. As Sophia said, yes, colonization, imperialism thrives on disembodiment and disconnection. And today I want to offer us the foundation of just being in our bodies. Not only do we learn with our minds, right, but learning is an embodied, whole body experience. So with that being said, I want to invite you, if you feel comfortable, um, to do a somatic check-in with ourselves, with our bodies. We call this a body scan and somatic work. So with that being said, I want us to orient to our space first. So if there's anything in the space that you're sitting in right now, that feels grounding to you, that feels pleasant to look at, I just want you to orient to that for a moment. For me, I have a few plants in my apartment, so they're really nice to look at. So take a second and see what that is for you. It could be a picture, could be a pet, whatever it is for a moment. Just orient to that. And now I want to invite you for a moment to just notice how the chair you're sitting in supports you. And if your feet are on the ground, notice your feet on the ground as well too. And then I want to invite you to either soften your gaze or you can close your eyes, whatever you feel comfortable doing. I want to invite you to do a whole body scan. And we're just noticing. That's all we're doing. We're just noticing if there's any constriction, any tension, any expansion. I just want us to notice. So let's start at our head. Let's notice our head. Just checking in. What do we notice? Is there any constriction? Is there any expansion there? Is there any tension? Let's just notice. And then let's move to our neck. Just notice how your neck supports your head. What are we noticing there? Are we noticing our throat? Is there any tightness there? Is it loose? And then we can move to our shoulders. What are we noticing in our shoulders? Is there any tension there? Do we feel any pressure, any weight? And I want us to notice our upper back. I don't know where your shoulder blades are. All right, just notice your upper back. Is there any tension there? Is it loose? Can you freely move it? Is it tight? Just notice that. And then your mid back and lower back. Just notice that, those areas. And then I want us to come back to our chest. Just notice your chest area. What's happening there? Are there any sensations coming online? Just notice that. And I want us to check in with our gut. What's happening in our gut, in our stomach area? What's happening there? And then let's check in with our arms. We're noticing our arms. They feel heavy, do they feel light? Just notice your arms. And then your hands. Let's move to our hands. Notice your hands. They feel cold, they feel warm. Is there any sensation there? Is there no sensation there? Just noticing. We're not ascribing any meaning to anything that we're noticing in our body. We're just noticing. And let's move to our legs or our thighs. Let's notice our thighs. What are we noticing there? And then move to our knees and our shins, calf area. Just notice that area. I say sensation there. Let's notice our feet. Notice your feet, then notice your toes. Pause. What happened? Oh no. Okay, I'm back. Notice your feet. Let's notice your toes. Now I want you just to notice how the chair supports you. If you're sitting back on the chair, notice how it supports your back, how it supports your legs. And then let's just orient to our space again. Maybe find that thing that's grounding for you. It could be a plant, it could be a picture of a loved one, it could be a painting you have, some art, any type of decor. Just notice that. Thank you for doing this somatic practice with me with checking in and grounding ourselves in the moment. And then if you want to learn more about me, I believe I'm on the website, the D20 website, and I can put my information as well too again in the chat. If anybody would like to reach out to me. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Tolu. That was very helpful. So now we'll have a chance to kind of orient ourselves to a few of the thematic questions behind this session, specifically through some presentations from our speakers to share their own engagement with the issues according to their own areas of work, lived experience, and just interaction with different communities. And I just wanted to note here as well that one of our speakers who was highlighted in the invite, and Malika, unfortunately couldn't join us today, but you can still learn more about her work and organization, Ijaruka, from the bio that's online, which is about reimagining how Pan-African knowledge, culture, and communities shape our shared future. But for today, some of our framing questions, which the presentations will highlight, include: can artificial intelligence serve decolonial liberation, or is it irredeemably entangled with capitalism and empire? And then another one is about: how do we center more than human life and intelligence in our resistance, governance, and imagination? So you might have these in the back of your mind as you're listening to these presentations. So for our first one, I want to introduce Elvie Banda. Elvie is a program management consultant and community advocate with over 5 years of experience leading federally funded initiatives, supporting inclusive excellence and workforce development in STEM. With an academic background in international politics and development from National Chengchi University and comparative cultures and politics from Michigan State University, their work bridges institutional systems and grassroots movements. And as a founding member of the Future of Congo, as mentioned earlier, a Congolese-led organization, they help drive community-centered solutions rooted in self-determination, cultural preservation, and extended relief support. And their flagship program, Education for All, constructed 6 classrooms in the former Mungunga displacement camp and works to support displaced families across Eastern Congo in the wake of the 2025 M23 invasion. And through digital advocacy reaching over 258,000 people, they challenge dominant narratives by amplifying Congolese voices, histories, and lived realities from within the community. So we're excited to hear from you, and I'll pass it over to you, Elvie.
Hi, everyone. Just want to do a quick check if everyone can hear me.
Yes, it's good.
Okay, awesome. Thank you once again for inviting me to be here as a speaker to speak through some of these issues, and then also for highlighting the future of Congo as well and the work that we do. It's extremely important, especially for individuals in these spaces to be aware of that work and contribute to it in any way possible. And so I think my slides will be shared, but before that, I just want to say in terms of my positionality and how I will be approaching some of the questions that we're grappling with throughout this conference is really from the perspective of a Pan-Africanist and more importantly, from the perspective of a Congolese American, a Congolese person within the diaspora. So that's really my orientation from this question. And hopefully it comes out throughout the presentation. So just want to do a quick check.
All right, thank you.
We can see it, Elvie. It's there now.
All right, perfect. So I don't need to do this bit anymore since we've already gone through that. But as I said before, the perspective in which I'll be speaking from comes from Congolese within the diaspora, as well as somebody who does on the ground direct action in Congo. And so that's really going to be the framing to which I speak about. And we can go on to the next slide. And I also wanted to better contextualize my approach to this topic and these conversations by saying that much of my ideas and how I approach this presentation was really grounded and informed by the resolutions passed at the 1958 Conference of Independent African States, because I believe the conversations at that time were some of the most intimate and earliest encounters with imperialism that we have to date. And so particularly from a Pan-Africanist lens. So I find this to be an important site in which to build on working ideas on how Africans in particular can counter existing iterations of colonialism and neocolonialism. Next slide, please. And so what I really wanted to focus on in this conversation in particular was for us to have a real understanding of some of these topics that we're talking about, particularly when it comes to decolonialism and decoloniality. And I appreciate Sophia in the beginning for really grounding us in definitions, because I think oftentimes we move with a basic understanding of ideas, and those basic understandings can evolve into different things over time as different people's orientation and definitions come into play. And oftentimes we can sort of get lost in what our intentions are and what we should be grounded in. And that becomes even more clear now as we're talking about AI and technology and entering that into the fold of how colonialism is continuing to adapt and iterate itself. And so for me in particular, it's important to delineate the movement of decolonization, which I look at as a process of undoing colonialism, and to go into the state of decoloniality, which is a state of, for me, action, creation, and future making. And so I provide, what this movement looks like from my understanding. And I think the process through which we decolonize shouldn't be the same state in which we rebuild, because due to proximity and urgency, we can find ourselves using some of the same tactics, some of the same strategies that we're most familiar with because of our history with colonialism, and because oftentimes in that decolonization process, we can just be taking over the same institutions, same offices, same practices, same theories that are left behind by the colonialists. And so it's really important for us to make that break and start thinking very tangibly about how do we move forward to states where we are rebuilding, thinking of futures, thinking of the impossible, audaciously requesting the impossible and building the impossible. And so I think that brings us to a place where, oh, I wasn't done, sorry. We can go back to that slide, yes. So I think that brings us to a place where if decoloniality is not our explicit intentional destination through the decolonization process, we can see today where we have African states doing the bidding of colonialism for a chance at stability and prosperity. And for a case study, which I'll go into in the next slide, when we think about Congo and the state that Congo is in, it's a result of neocolonialism really being internalized by many of Congo's neighbors. And one in particular, which has the most notoriety because it makes some of the greatest impact, is Rwanda. And its use of M23, which is an armed rebel group, as a proxy army to then go into Eastern Congo with the intentions of occupying, of looting mineral resources in order to then resell. So I think we really need to be thinking very critically and very strategically about how we can negotiate growth and transform systems whose only means of survival is our destabilization. And that also comes into play when we're thinking about tools and we're thinking about technology and we're thinking about AI. We really need to be grounded in understanding what these technologies are, what their basic intention should be, and how we can utilize them through decolonial practices, through a state of decoloniality. Because tools and technology are very much needed in future making. And so we really need to be critical and cautious of understanding which tools and which tech are inherently created for our destruction and which have been stolen and which need to return to the people. And we can go to the next slide. And so the reason I am taking this approach when talking about technology is because I think that Congo's inverse relationship with technology and the global tech innovation is probably one of the greatest examples of under-examined relationship between technology and colonial empire making. And for those who are in the activist space when it comes to Congo, we really talk about Congo's relationship with colonization, with exploitation, and we marry that together with sort of these different waves in technological innovation, global technological innovation. So as basically the site of numerous strategic minerals that are vital to technology and tech innovation, Congo's fate is inextricably linked to technology. And we can condense that, as I said previously, to 4 broad periods that involve the extraction of mineral resources or natural resources from the Congo to support different waves of technology. One of the most important and also one of the most intentionally hidden was the development of nuclear weapons and the Marshall Plan, in which the mines that were located in Chikolombwe had a massive ton of uranium, I think probably somewhere in the 80s and 90s% in terms of what the world held. And so it was through the exploitation of those mines that the US empire was able to create the atomic bomb and to advance Western hegemony. And this was something that they kept deliberately secret. This is something that, you know, you can read about you can read about now the intentions of the Marshall Plan to keep that secret, because they feared that if Russia were able to get a hold of this, or if any other powers of Germany were able to get a hold of this, it would literally be the end and the demise of the US and of Western hegemony. So we really need to understand that at the core of this technology do exist these raw materials, and these raw materials do exist on the physical plane, and oftentimes they're located in the global south, and folks in the global south face the greatest destruction when it comes to the exploitation of these minerals for tech advancement. And even today there is still little understanding, little research done to understand the physical harm as well as the health deterioration of individuals living in Chikolombwe and what they had to experience in terms of mining the raw uranium. So that's something that is really deliberately hidden, and that's a legacy that is still under the guise of really protecting the bullet that keeps imperialism firing at the rest of us. And so when we also think about tech booms now, as we're moving into smart technology, and as also we're moving into to AI and green energy, a lot of you may know Congo being linked with coltan, with cobalt, and the exploitation and extraction of those resources to power what we talk about being, our cell phones, but it's so much broader than just our cell phones. It's a lot of powering devices that are used in healthcare, powering equipment that's used in military technology. So we really need to look critically at how the exploitation of Congo, the destabilization of Congo, leads to the advancement of Western imperialism and the use of technology for imperialist gain. And I do believe these slides will be shared afterwards. So if folks want to take a deeper look at this map, I'll be more than happy to share the slides. And then we can move to the next slide. And so in keeping in line with really orienting ourselves and understanding explicitly what we're talking about when it comes to technology, the use of technology for imperialism, I did just want to take a moment to think more critically and talk more critically about AI and what exactly AI is, because I've seen a lot of discourse where there's this understanding of AI where like AI is a complete evil. We don't need AI. We don't want AI. And I think there's a bit of well, number one, AI is a misnomer in and of itself. So AI, referring to artificial technology, is not even something that is scientifically, it's not a scientific fact, right? When we talk about artificial intelligence and how we can use machines in order to recreate or duplicate human intelligence, that's not something that's been scientifically proven. So we don't want to get ourselves distracted with a myth that's being created by individuals to advance their own imperialist gains. We really want to be sure that we understand the technology that we're working with so that we are also involved in the knowledge production process. And I think we also need to delink the tech from commercial products that the tech oligarchs are pushing. So because they're deliberately making technology synonymous with their ideology and empire making. So we can see some of the different uses of machine learning itself. So machine learning being one component under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. And so we have machine learning in healthcare, used for disease detection. We have it in banking for fraud, predictive analysis. We see it in transportation and urban planning, and we also see it in entertainment. So a lot of what we're using in order just to do task related work is a function of AI. So AI doesn't have to be something that is rapid in growth. It doesn't have to be something that consumes to the extent that it's harming environments. So if we go and have a radical understanding of the technologies that we're in relationship with, then we can have a different approach and think of the infinite possibilities in which we can utilize these technologies. And also, just to harken back on something that Sophia said earlier at the start, which I think was really great in grounding us moving forward, especially when talking about technology, is not accepting what exists today as inevitable or as truth. So ChatGPT, as we know it today, is not an inevitable progression of machine learning or even large language model technology, which is what it is. It is deliberately a concerted effort by OpenAI and Sam Altman to dominate the AI field by growing the product rapidly at the cost of environments, natural resource exploitation, and human exploitation. And so it brings us into this sort of cyclical question of power and access. We have to think about who is receiving the funding and the capital to create AI-powered technology, what they're focusing on in the output of this technology, and the safety and progression at the speed that's not at the cost that's detrimental to human beings and does not depend on exploitation of the global majority. So in doing work in criticizing AI and doing work in pushing those who are funding a lot of the research that's going into AI, we have to understand that we need to push for technology that's task oriented. We have to push for funding of technology that advances our growth as individuals. We have to push for technology that makes for safer environments, that allows the access and ease of individuals to have their basic needs met. That's what we need to push for. But first, we need to delineate what is true technology making and what is a tool of the empire. And that is where we can separate ChatGPT and these sort of like AI products from machine learning technology. And just a small fun fact that I just want to throw out there. The term artificial intelligence was coined, I believe, around the either mid or late 50s by John McCarthy, who was a scientist, and he was basically trying to get funding for research that he was doing. Previously, it was called autonomous studies, but that really wasn't picking up traction. So then he coined the term artificial intelligence. And still within that field of study, there is, contention in terms of whether or not we can truly, artificialize or recreate human intelligence. So I just want us to bear that in mind as we move forward in talking about AI, whether in this space or in other spaces. And we can move to the next slide. And when we talk about digital empires, or we talk about empire making and ask the question, is AI as we know it today, or artificial intelligence, or a lot of the products that are coming out of these sort of bigger tech companies, is it detrimental, or can it be used in order to carry out decolonial work? And I think with emerging tech empires like AI, there's a larger question that I have, or that I would like us to consider, which is the dispossession of machine learning technology, or the dispossession of knowledge in and of itself. And the idea that that production is being tied and removed from the infinite creations in what we could imagine technology to be. So as I mentioned before, we need to ideologically unleash this technology from their neo-colonial project, which again is in parallel much to when we understand how coloniality came about. If coloniality came about by telling people of the global majority and people who looked a certain way, had certain features, existed in a certain geographical climate, if coloniality carried out its work by telling those people that they were inhuman, that they were subhuman, and as a result, they deserved XYZ, and it inundated every aspect of our life and every aspect of society with this myth. And even today, we're still functioning under that colonial matrix, and we're trying to figure out ways in which to unravel that, trying to figure out ways in which to either work within the system to subvert that, or to work outside of the system and create something new. And what would working outside of the system even look like? So I would like us to really pause where we're at, because I think with these digital empires, with companies like OpenAI, with NVIDIA, with Microsoft, we are truly at the start of their empire making with these digital products. When it comes to this OpenAI technology, we are at the start of them creating a reality that tells us AI is synonymous with the degradation of our environment. AI is synonymous with this understanding that we as human beings will be replaced, that we as human beings will have our intelligence taken, and that something will exist that goes beyond us. So there's a book that was released recently by the author Karen Howe, who talks about and really goes into depth with how individuals like Sam Altman, Elon Musk, these Silicon Valley people and the culture that they have there are really leading the world in a myth about what AI technology is and what the world would be post the products that they put out, like OpenAI. So there are some individuals within that camp who have this understanding that artificial intelligence and the creation of human intelligence, it's real, it's a world that we're going into, and that they have to be the ones to lead us into that future. There are others who do believe that it's real, but they believe that it will be the end of humanity as we know it. But they also are in a race to, figure out how to hone this technology and lead us away from that. So we have to understand as individuals who are existing outside of that context in which technology is being used in this rapid race among billionaires who are attempting to extract as much money as possible through the decline of our environment, to the decline of individual human health. We don't exist in the reality that they're creating and attempting to put on the rest of us. So we really need to be intentional and critical about how we're even approaching conversations about AI so that we're not falling into sort of this new colonial matrix that they're trying to create with technology. And I believe we can go to the next slide. And so as I'm getting to the end of my portion, I do want to say that what I'm most excited about being here at this conference is to really engage in a discussion with everyone to flesh through these ideas, to see different perspectives and different positionalities and figure out a way forward, because that's really how we move, not in terms of, being reactionary and just rejecting everything that comes from what we deem to be the enemy, or from the colonialists or from those who are in power, whatever name you want to give these individuals, but to really have a critical take and understanding of the context that we're in and how we maneuver within that context. And so for me, imperialism really becomes a question of modernity and who owns the future. And it's often positioned in a way where what is modern is solely in possession of the colonists, and the rest of us are unworthy to participate and are, left in the future to build it, or we're robbed of resources and we scramble with how to cope or either how to reject. But we rarely contend with our own crafting in this future. So how do we hone this technology? How do we support individuals who have a decolonialist perspective, who are doing research that makes sure that this technology as it exists is being done in a proper way? And the reality of AI technology, especially in relation to the work that we do at the Future of Congo, is that it is a part of the work that we do. And we understand the ways in which we use it. And so I lay it out here. So a lot of the work, especially within the space of digital advocacy, and I talked about this before on my platform, and how we have to be critical of how we are interacting with this technology, especially with how it is conditioning us, right? So on platforms such as TikTok and Instagram, where a lot of people are getting rapid information about different issues that are happening around the world, we're able to spread information a lot more quickly. We're able to connect communities a lot more quickly. A lot of us are using generative AI to do the work that we do, whether it's, editing images, whether it's constructing our own algorithms and making sure certain information that we want to see on our For You page, or, whatever it is that you're using on your timeline, making sure that we have that within our reach. And so it does fuel the reach that we have to be able to have as many people within our community as we have them, and it drives our mutual aid model. But we're also critical of the ways in which we engage. We're also critical that we don't want to be using imagery that regurgitates this iconography of African suffering. So images that are rooted in trauma, images that are rooted in degradation, in suffering. We do want to show images that show growth of Africans, that show building and creation making, and also just not getting lost in the algorithm, this chase of high engagement, this chase of there are a lot of tricks that people do on different social media platforms in order to garner more engagement, but we have to think critically about how that interacts with our ability to witness human suffering. We have to contend with how that erodes our physical relationships in terms of building physical communities and doing direct action in the advocacy that we do. And so in terms of marrying the digital and the physical, one of the recent campaigns that we had was our Back to School campaign, in which we really challenged our virtual community and folks who follow us on our various platforms to not just see Congo and the aid for Congo and the advocacy for Congo as something that was merely digital. That's something that they just click and retweet and share, and send files for, and that would be enough. But we really challenged them to bring Congo within their community, to work with community members, to gather school supplies, gently use clothing, to work with their friends, their families, whatever institutions they had at their disposal, to gather these donations and to send them directly to us. And so I've shown on our platform the process in which we do that. So me collecting the donations, me unboxing the donations, showing individuals what they sent. I think it's really important for us to use technology as a tool, but to not allow technology to become us, to so internalize it that we're no longer able to see each other and to see ourselves, and to be so overtaken by this algorithm as if it is an inevitable part of our identity. It is still something that is separate from us, that should just merely be used as a tool. And so I will pause there. I'm looking forward to further engaging in discussions with everyone else. I thank all of you for being here in participation with us as we grapple through some of these ideas and talk more fluidly through them during the panel discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Elvie. There's so much in there, and so useful also to understand some of like the histories and origins of these technologies, which I also wasn't aware of, so that we can, understand the ways that certain ideologies have become woven into them, and that we're more mindful of what we're bringing forward in our approaches to that. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump right into our next presentation, and then afterwards we'll get more into discussion. So I want to introduce Cynthia Malone. Cynthia is an ecologist, artist, and abolitionist of Afro-Caribbean descent. She has researched wildlife ecologies, primatology, and stewardship alongside Black and Indigenous peoples globally for over 15 years. She has a background in zoology and anthropology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's in conservation biology at Columbia University. Her work for the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation at the American Museum of Natural History has included managing partnerships across international scientific organizations, governments, and local conservation NGOs, also working closely with the Solomon Islands Community Conservation Partnership on Indigenous-led stewardship. And fusing her experiences as a Black woman in science with her work as an organizer in the movement for Black Lives from 2015, Cynthia lent fire to a global disruption of colonial scientific institutions. And as organizing co-chair of Black Youth Project NYC in 2016, she's co-led political education for Black liberation and direct actions against racist systems of policing. She also co-founded and co-chaired the Society for Conservation Biology's Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee from 2015 to 2017. And she's been recognized by multiple magazines for her advocacy for equity in STEM and contributions towards decolonizing science. Cynthia's current research, art, and spiritual practice unfolds throughout the Caribbean and South America, and she also continues to expand her work as an educator invested in epistemic repair and liberatory science pedagogy, most recently as visiting faculty in citizen science at Bard College and also alongside Caribbean education and cultural institutions. So I'm excited to pass it over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's really wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you to the Decoloniality Network for creating this space. Thank you, Elvie, for sharing your incredible work with the future of Congo and grounding us in some of the ways that digital empires manifest in our current time. Thank you, everyone, for being here and all the collaborations of beings that allow for us to be alive on this realm and present here together in this current moment. Thank you, Tolu, for grounding us in our bodies as we are in this space right now. I know Zoom can sometimes feel a bit detached, so it's always a fantastic and necessary effort to reground us in the body. So I am going to talk a little bit around one of the guiding questions of this foundational session around the idea of more than human intelligence and how that relates to how we might reimagine, govern, and create new futures. I have a presentation. Let's see if it'll work. Okay, do y'all see the presentation?
Yeah, I think it's taking a moment to be full screen though, at least for me.
Okay. Can you see it now?
On mine, it still is like where you press present. I don't know if others are seeing that, but it hasn't like actually gone into it.
It's tricky because I can't see what y'all see.
I see it in editing mode right now.
Okay.
I think you need to press present. Yeah, what you're doing now. Present full screen.
Can you see it now?
No, it's still the same, but I don't know if it's a delay.
I think it might be delayed, so in a few seconds.
Yeah, let's give it some time.
I think Canva is also a little tricky. You might have to just show it in the presenter view.
I think it's okay if not.
Hold on. It could also be like how I'm sharing. How about now?
We're still seeing the screen frozen on when you first clicked on the present button, and it isn't in full screen yet.
But it is larger, so if you do stay in editing mode, you probably could see it.
There
Oh,
we
there
go.
we go.
Oh, there we go.
Here we are.
Perfect.
Hey,
This together.
okay, great. I'm not like the most techie person. I really just like to be in the bush. So anyway, so yeah, I'll be speaking on this idea of more than human life and in relationship to my work within revolutionary ecology. So revolutionary ecology, intelligence, and technology after man. So Sophia shared a little bit about my background, just so you have a sense of where I'm coming from and my trajectory. I started out my career as an ecologist in the natural sciences, very much a more traditional pathway. As a child, I really was obsessed with primates, orangutans in particular, and was very determined to study them. That passion led me across the world studying wildlife, including Indonesia, where I studied orangutans and how they built their nests, my master's work in Cameroon, looking at human-wildlife relationships and conflict, my work in the Solomon Islands, working with indigenous communities. And all through my experience, really began to see not only from the racism that I experienced as being often one of the only Black people, or even sometimes person of color in the room, but also seeing the ways that science itself, the institutions of science, shape the creation of race and codified hierarchies of what is human and what is non-human, and the role of primates in kind of sitting at that border between what we consider to be human and not human, and how we think of the wild. So a lot of my work began to contend with this epistemological rupture that the sciences manufactured in who we are as beings on this earth. And that coincided for me in this kind of current iteration, or this time of the movement for Black lives. After the murder of Eric Garner, I got really involved in frontline movement organizing and integrated that with my work in the sciences. So here you can see a photo of a protest that I co-led and organized with Decolonize This Place for Indigenous Peoples Day 2018, where we were talking about the history of eugenics and how the Natural History Museum still perpetuated and celebrated eugenicists in the museum space. And this is something I think we can tend to think of as being antiquated or of the past, but there were eugenics conferences held in the 2000s at University College London. These are not, antiquated movements. We see that kind of language leveraged when we talk about immigration, in particular, the notion of alien, notion of invasive. All of these things in many ways come down to what the science is codified as legitimate and as reality. One of the thinkers that have really supported me in this understanding is Jamaican philosopher and playwright Sylvia Wynter. And she says in her work, Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power, Truth, and Freedom Towards the Human After Man, she wrote, the correlated hypothesis here is that all our present struggles with respect to race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, struggles over the environment, global warming, severe climate change, the sharply unequal distribution of the earth resources. These are all differing facets of the central ethnoclass, man versus human struggle. The most salient of all these was to be that of the mythology of the Black other of sub-Saharan Africans and their diaspora descendants. With this population's group's systemic stigmatization, social inferiorization, and dynamically produced material deprivation, thereby serving both to verify the overrepresentation of man as if it were the human, and to legitimate the subordination of the world and well-being of the latter to those of the former. All of this was done in a law-like manner. So Sylvia Wynter was a pioneer in helping us to think about the ways that what we think of as human and what's not human in the construction of man with a capital M has foregrounded our present day world order through the systems that we live in. And what we're seeing now is technology being leveraged to further perpetuate that divide. So I really love etymology and getting to the root of words. I don't think I'll have to go so far in depth, as I think Elvie did a really great job in orienting us around some of these definitions, but let's really look at it. So this is from Etymology Online. When we look at what is intelligence, we see in the late 14th century, the word arising to describe the highest faculty of the mind, capacity for comprehending general truths. In terms of the construction of the word, the combination of inter, between, and leger, choose. So really talking about the ability to discern. We see in the early 15th century, the propagation of the understanding of intelligence as being superior understanding. So we need to understand that the construction of what we think of as intelligent was very much aligned with some of the processes that Sylvia Wynter described in terms of dehumanization and scientific racism or eugenics. When we think about who is described as intelligent, what is described as intelligent. Let's consider technology. 1610s, a discourse or treatise on an art or the arts, combining techno, which refers to art, skill, craft, method, system, with craft, weaving or fabricating. We also can refer to technology as the application of knowledge. But when we think about this idea of weaving or fabricating and systemizing that, is that something that's only relegated to human life? Two of the most prominent figures, I think, in my upbringing as a human, as a scholar, as an activist are Jane Goodall and Assata Shakur. Jane Goodall, as some of you might know, recently transitioned. And before she did, she was on a worldwide tour, as she has been for a lot of her life in really thinking about animal intelligence. And she recently said in an interview, it seems these days everyone is so involved with technology that we figure we're not only part of the natural world, we're an animal like all the others. But what we depend on is healthy ecosystems. And it's the ecosystems that we're gradually destroying because of unsustainable demands made on our natural resources. And I always say, we are the most intellectual species to walk the planet, but we're not intelligent. If you're intelligent, you do not destroy your only home. So I think what Jane Goodall was saying here was really, really critical in thinking about the stupidity of planetary destruction. What I think she leaves out, and other scholars have talked about in relationship to her work and the ways that some white scientists have moved in the world, is who is this we, in terms of how a certain kind of ideology, when we think about white supremacist ideology, interacts with the earth. But I think this is still really important framing in thinking about who has a claim on intelligence in relationship to the role of the non-human. So let's talk a little bit about wildlife technology, the ways that we see non-human life. I hate that term. We see it's because the human, that's why I say after man, because the human is something I think we are in active contestation with in this current time. And I think we're struggling and stumbling over the right words to use. And I think that's important. I think it's important to interrogate. So I'm going to say wildlife technology. So I shared a little bit earlier that some of my undergraduate research, my honors thesis, I was looking at orangutans, and what I was exploring was their nest building practices. So orangutans every night construct a nest, and they spend around 30 minutes doing this. And primatologists describe this process as being one of the most representative of their advanced cognitive capacities. They make blankets for their nests. They sometimes will construct umbrellas if it's raining. They do all of these things. And really what they're doing when they're creating a nest is weaving. So they sit on a branch, a sturdy branch, and then they weave in the smaller branches to create these nests. And every night they make a new nest as they're moving around the forest. Orangutans are the most solitary of all apes and more solitary than other primates. And so it's really critical that they have this very strong, robust mental map of the forest, and they're constantly moving, following the shifts in fruit availability in the tropical peat swamps that is their habitat. So I was studying every day, walking these transects, looking at these nests and trying to discern whether or not they were choosing particular tree species in order to build their nests. So for me, that involved literally measuring hundreds of leaves, the diameter, the leaf area size, and all of this to understand whether or not they were. And it turns out from my research demonstrated that they were selecting particular tree species in relationship to leaves and branches that would provide a comfortable nest as well as an association to some of their needs. So I share this to demonstrate orangutans as weavers, orangutans as having, their own intelligence and technologies, and that being really critical when we think about, who has there's no monopoly on intelligence or technology. This also facilitates the construction of sorry for the noise, the social ecological systems of, in this context, Indonesia. Let's let it pass. In that, as orangutans are
Can't hear anything, Chris. Just sorry, apology. I just wanted to say that we can't hear anything in the background. You're all good.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, that's great. They are constructing the ecosystems that they're collaborating alongside humans. This is a co-collaborative process, and it's really critical when we're thinking about technology and we get caught up in the digital. I think sometimes we forget that we are earthbound beings. I think that's part of what, the project of technologists and technocrats like Elon Musk is, this idea of not just like digital, but going to outer space. And this, this alienation from the earth. And the only way we will survive is through remembering, as Jane Goodall says, our relationship to the natural world, our relationship to ourselves and each other as animals. And this is something that, Indigenous peoples and our ancestors knew and worked with in terms of how to collaborate in building worlds that make our survival possible. So I want to share a short video, if it'll let me, of one example of this in thinking about the creation of social ecological systems in the context of the Caribbean and South America, alongside the trafficking of Africans in the transatlantic slavery. So here is a clip of some folks in Suriname demonstrating an ancestral practice of braiding seeds in hair in order to carry these seeds over into where they were trafficked. Can you hear the video? Okay.
Yes.
Gonna be subtitles.
Tijd van de slavernij. Ja, toen onze voorouders naar Suriname waren gekomen, ja, konden ze kieszak nemen of tas nemen om spullen mee te nemen. En ze hadden dingen, je hebt ook cassavestokken, maar heel klein. Zo, als het stok van die cassave één ding heeft, ken je dat ding? Ja. Ja, dan kan je dat in je haar stoppen. En als je dan op een andere plaats bent waar je kan planten en op de grond zet, groeit het. En als je al één heeft, heb je zoveel. Ja, want van die ene ga je dan weer andere. En toen hadden mevrouw, zo, ik ben weer de naam vergeten, een rijst in haar haar gezet. En daarna had die mevrouw die haren gevlochten. En dan waren die rijstzaadjes erin. En dan ga ik wijzen hoe het gedaan, hoe het was gebeurd. Even een voorbeeld geven. Hier heb ik rijst. Ja, ik heb hier rijst. En dan zet ik het op Marion hoofd. Zet het hier. En Marion hoofd, je hoeft niet veel te hebben. Als je dat een beetje hebt, blijft het hierin. En zo had zij het gedaan.
Ja. En waar had ze dat gedaan, Edith? Op het slavenschip of in Paramaribo of in Afrika?
In Afrika.
Oké.
Ja, want we hebben het vandaag meegenomen. En dan had ze haar gevlochten. Het zit al erin. En dan gaat ze dan vlechten. Zo. Zie je? Ja. Is dit? Zo was het gebeurd. En dan zat ik daarin. Zo gedaan. Ja. En nu is.
So can you imagine the amount of ancestral knowledge and the application of that knowledge and wisdom, the amount of bravery, the depth of insight and faith in the future to take these seeds as you are about to embark on what is one of the most horrific things to have ever occurred to humans in the history of our being on this earth, to take these seeds, to braid them in hair, to carry them over so that you might have access to the seeds that would give plants that you are in deep relationship with for survival, and also as an understanding of those plants as being part of your relations. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about ancestral technology, Black technology, Indigenous technology. And I want us to foreground that. I think, the digital and AI is happening, and yes, we need to grapple with that. But I want us to remember these technologies as being critical and of making the future possible. These are also futuristic technologies. So I want to speak a little bit about a project that I've been building for the past 7 years. to ground us in not only this idea of, wildlife, the non-human, more than human intelligence, but also this, I think, movement that's happening right now amongst, I think globally of a generation, but I see particularly amongst folks of the African diaspora, where we are reclaiming our ancestral traditions and practices. So this project is called Call and Response: Black Archives Across Borders of Being. Within the living, breathing, ancestral fabric of the African diaspora, the archive is a critical technology. More than a mere repository of the past, our archives initiate a call and response between body, land, and waters determined to outlive genocide. As a descendant of Africans enslaved in Guyana and the Caribbean, this call has drawn me across borders of time, space, and being to recover memories beyond my lifetime. So in my life, this call really was strongly initiated after I led the protest at the museum. At the time, this was 2018, it was extremely radical. And I was in exile from the field of the sciences for doing this work. I mean, that's another element that we talk about, what it means to resist these systems and some of the backlash we might face, is also, I think, part of the conversation. And in that time, I really started to experience my ancestors speaking to me, calling me to these particular parts of the earth to reconnect with them and our traditions and our sciences. At the same time, I was studying wildlife. So this project that I've been working on for the past 7 years now really integrates all of that together. But I hope it can share in all of us thinking about, how we chronicle our lives, outside of what feels like overwhelming domination of social media. We are the archive. We embody the archive. And I think it's really critical we remember that. So here's just one example. This is actually in Barbados, a cave that I saw before I came to Barbados and later realized I had some ancestry near this cave. And a poem that I wrote. Oceanic mother calls to me from sky, from tree, from breath. I die again, drowning to reach her, from other worlds made sin. Where there is no light, then there is no doubt. I remember Olokun. Olokun is an Orisha that is the personification of the deep sea within the Ifa practice, originating in Nigeria. And so I speak to this to illustrate, the power and potential of ancestral technologies and helping us remember our connection to the earth, who we are as earth, and who we can be moving into the future. I think there's a lot that will unfold in our future conversations on this panel and hopefully afterwards. But I'll end here. And yeah, if you want to see more about my work, here's just like a little link page. And yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you all so much for being a witness and being together in this moment.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you also for sharing poetry in the video. I think it really, enriches the space, and it's beautiful to think about it through all these lenses. And I loved hearing your presentation side by side too. And it's interesting to think about like the natural sciences and like these futuristic technologies side by side as kind of different coins of the same issues. And the ways in particular, I think you both touched on like hierarchies of humanness, or definitions of humanness that have been inherited from the past, and how like these ideologies get codified, whether it's through technology or the sciences. And I think you both also touched on the ways like certain language and frameworks have often served to like limit our comprehension and consideration of what is possible, whether it is what's possible, what counts as intelligence, or what we can do with technology. And I also like that you both kind of spoke about like the ways our practices often reflect our attitude towards or faith in the future or different futures, whether it's what our ancestors have done, as you've mentioned, or what it is we're doing today with the seeds we have to work with, whether it's literal seeds or seeds of AI technology now at our disposal. And I also like the way you both like wove history with the present and kind of the significance of understanding the past. So before we open it up to the rest of the room to react and ask questions or have comments. And I think for the sake of time, we might unfortunately cut out the small groups and just have a general discussion. But I did want to ask you both, I think, Cynthia, you kind of got into one question that was on my mind, which is about what are the like non-digital technologies we most need to center and invest in this moment in conjunction with AI and other like mainstream tech if we want to move towards more just futures. And I love that you defined technology or offered like one definition that reminds us that it could be about the application of knowledge, or, you know, it's not just the digital pieces. It could be technologies of the heart, of knowledge traditions, of social relationships. And I think you both kind of already answered this question a bit. So maybe an extra question is also, if we are recognizing like there's other non-digital tech we need to invest in, how do we get, I guess, those in power with certain decision-making power to equally see these as significant? And I guess I'm thinking of like being in different policy spaces where it's obvious that, you know, we can't just keep focusing on like decisions with tech without pausing to be like, whose values are we embedding in them? But people, especially policymakers, don't often want to stop and have like a heartfelt conversation about whose values we have. Or if we say the action most needed is to think about the histories we've inherited, I think people often think the act of reflecting and looking backwards is not actually action and urgent. So I guess if you have any thoughts around that, whether it's policymakers or anyone around us who also needs to be invested in this. Whoever would like to answer first.
I can answer, but Elvie, if you have a pressing thought, because I also just spoke, please. Okay. Well, it just came to mind when you were speaking about, you know, the policy space and technologies that are not digital and movements in that way. There was just the International Union for the Conservation of Nature meetings, which is a similar kind of as the UN COP meetings that are about to happen in 5 days in Belém in Brazil. The IUCN is more related to biodiversity conservation and getting into the realm of the non-human. And they passed, I think, 5 points that are related to the rights of nature, indigenous governance. So there are movements, but we have to remember, and I think all of us at this space probably know, the momentum around the creation of those possibilities and conversations happening in like the UN space all come from centuries of, you know, indigenous peoples mobilizing and organizing in our own sovereign spaces. And I think the protection, maintenance, and expansion of our sovereignty is really critical to our ability to engage in the process of remembering our technologies. And so one area that I've been involved in the Caribbean is reparations and thinking about reparative justice as a form of, you know, you can think about redressing harm. I don't know if that's possible, or pay you what you owe me, but it's also, you know, ideally allowing us to, you know, maintain and create and expand on our sovereignty. I think Indigenous people having tenure over their land allows for the maintenance of our technologies in space. I think that having the resources to, yeah, lead our own spaces is really critical to that. So I just wanted to foreground that in relationship to the policy orientation.
Great, thank you.
I agree with where Cynthia is going, and this might feel a bit cynical of me to say, but I don't think that we can look to institutions in which we have no real power or leverage to dissuade. So when we're thinking about policies and how to stop those who are in power from advancing technology that exploits us, that harms indigenous practices, that harms people, that harms the soil. We have to also consider the fact that currently Sam Altman is standing on international stages. This is the founder of OpenAI, ChatGPT. He's standing on international stages alongside the President of the United States of America. He's going on international trips seeking land with the President of the United States of America, and he's speaking about a term called AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. AGI does not exist. It's not real. It's something that Sam Altman and OpenAI community believe in. He has the wealth, right? He has the financial, monetary capabilities of pushing this idea on international stages and ensuring that something that is a myth about what technology is and the world we will live in, where he says AGI will solve climate change, AGI will solve world hunger, AGI will do what the human can't. This is something he believes in. And so I think when we're asking questions about how to get certain institutions to not do this or not do that to ensure that they're protecting us, we have to understand who they're controlled by and what controls them, which is money. And we may not have the money to make sure that certain policies are written in certain ways. In all actuality, the billionaires and the technocrats, they have the money and they have the means to make sure that for the next 10 years, I believe that states won't be able to contend with what AI does within their states, right? So like Cynthia was saying, I think the energy and the focus, particularly in a decolonial space or in a decolonial context, needs to be creating spaces and creating pockets of research and support that counters that. So rather than focusing our energy, and this is hard to do, right? We're inundated by the colonial matrix, we're inundated by colonialism. So it's hard at times to not work with it or not try to negotiate with it. But I think heavy concentration should be put toward creating spaces, creating alternate funding and research that goes into really understanding how we can use this technology in a way that is aligned with our Indigenous understanding of the world, aligned with Indigenous practices, because even the idea of Indigenous knowledge being something of a counter to Western knowledge, or it doesn't have to exist in this sort of like dichotomy. And thank you so much, Cynthia, for giving us the definition of technology, because technology is simply creation. It's just simply creating something and applying the use of it. So we do it all the time, and there doesn't have to be this severance. So I think, to answer your question shortly, we have to, and the onus, and I even say this to myself, the onus is on us finding these spaces where there are researchers doing this work, just like the conference and the research that Cynthia mentioned, to find these spaces, amplify these spaces, participate in these spaces a lot more, because we are people of the global majority, and there is a psychological conditioning within us that oftentimes we don't believe in the work that we're doing because it doesn't get elevated to a certain level, or because it's so hidden, it's so underground, it's so, shoestring budget, so this and that, that we're oftentimes siloed from one another in the work that we do. So I think that's really where the work lies.
Yeah, thank you both so much for these thoughts. And yeah, it's a complex question too, but it makes a lot of sense where a lot of our folks needs to be. And some of it is resisting what's happening, the sources of power, but really focusing on creating alternative ideas and models that are flourishing from the grassroots so that they do become more powerful. And I think there is still hope too, even in some of these like powerful decision-making institutions, where I do see pockets of like grassroots movements happening from within there. And a lot of those are taking from and learning from what is happening in these other spaces, and hopefully giving credit there too. But we need that happening on the side so that it can be woven from within. I'm cognizant of the time, and I know there's a lot of really amazing experiences and opinions in this space. So I want to open space for that. And as mentioned, I'm sorry we can't do breakouts due to time. I know not everyone loves to speak in a big space, but please also make use of the chat and share thoughts. But basically now I want to open it up, whether it is questions or comments to the speakers, or more generally, if people in the room also have responses and thoughts in some of the questions that we've posed, how we tackle some of these issues, would love to hear those as well. I think I saw from earlier, there was already comments in the chat from Blair and Robin. I don't know if either of you want to add to what you said or share it with the large group, or it's fine if you want to just leave it in the comments. But I'll just give a moment here first to you if you have anything, Blair or Robin. And if not, in the meantime, I think I see Jamil with his hand up. So, oh, sorry, I think Blair. So maybe Blair and then Jamil. Yes, please come in off mic. Oh, you can't unmute. I don't know if colleagues can help to make sure Blair can unmute.
Yes, one second. Let me find Blair. Here we go. Okay. I've just asked to. There we go. Yeah.
Go ahead, Blair.
Hi everyone. Hi. I'm speaking to you from Tobago, part of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of my country, but a lot of this conversation definitely resonated with me, especially with the urgency that we're currently facing. I don't know how much of it is a mainstream conversation at this moment, but there is a lot of imperialism and new colonialism happening right now in this moment. And we're not a region that has been devoid of this. It has been there. A lot of it in recent history outside of Haiti has been a lot of soft power tactics, but now we are seeing this escalation of hard power tactics, especially with a lot of US militarization in our region. So Trinidad and Tobago has now been caught in that. Unfortunately, the current administration government is, not, I'm going to be very apolitical about it, but it's just not something that citizens have had an active role in deciding that this is the fate that we want for ourselves, to be an aggressor to our closest neighbor, that is Venezuela. So as of now, we've had about 16 strikes, US strikes in the Caribbean Sea, which they claim to be in international waters, that have led to the killings of 63 people, that Colombians, Venezuelans, and 2 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And what's happening is very scary. If you go to, there's I think a Twitter page that can show you, I think it's called Conflict Radar. You can see actually how much US assets are building up in this region. Yeah, I think given what's happening, and not to take away from especially what's happening in Sudan, this is a very, very serious crisis. But I think, there's no more room for war right now. And it just seems like something that we are not, as average citizens, as Black and brown people, Indigenous people, we just don't have that power of voice, or not being given that and deciding what's happening right now in our region. And I think that's what I wanted to speak to. And of course, a lot of this conversation, how can we take action? And this is part of the decolonial praxis, of course. How can we take action against this? And that's part of a lot of where my work lies now. I can't say that it's a mainstream movement, but it's something that a lot of activists are trying to center right now in this current moment. And I think if there is awareness that can be brought to this situation, that'd be fantastic. I don't know how much of it is being covered in the networks that you belong to, but it's important. And thank you for holding space and giving me this opportunity to just shed some light on what's happening here.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. And I think, yeah, also to your point that it's not taking away from other issues, but these are so interconnected. And that is part of decoloniality, is seeing how they're interwoven. And there are ways to keep our attention on all of them equally at once. And particularly when we see them as interlinked. So thank you.
Can I just respond to that?
Yeah.
Just coming from the context of the Caribbean. and the role of the sea, of the ocean, as being this contested space of, escalations of imperialism that existed before Trump, as much as folks try to, just look at the modern iteration. But we're also seeing in the context of Jamaica, uplifting what's happening there right now with the Category 5 hurricane that came through and decimated swaths of the island, particularly the parish of St. Elizabeth and other parishes, speaking to how, the technologies of empire have, shifted the global climactic regime. And we think that decolonization is a question, a choice, an intellectual exercise, but we will not survive if we do not contend with, the ways that imperialism shapes the climate, but also I think in terms of technologies as well. There are so many ways that Caribbean peoples and when we've been connected to our ancestral technologies have, worked with those to understand hurricanes, for example. There are a lot of ways that we can return to our power, in the context of these systems that continue to commit genocide in various on various levels. So just wanted to also uplift, that conversation. And thank you so much, Blair, for bringing that into the space. My uncle is from Tobago, so that has a soft space for me as well. So thank you.
Love that. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Maybe I'll give it to Robin and then Jamil.
Hello. Thank you all very much for your presentations. They were incredibly informative, and I'm very appreciative. I don't want to take up too much time. I think everyone's time here is very valuable. I just quickly wanted to say that I'm speaking to you from Malmö, Sweden. We organize decolonial workshops with Malmö University, but also with Lund University, reading books like Decolonial Sweden by Michael McAkron and Louis Fay. And I'm taking a course now in communication and development for social action. And I wanted to share, I made a comment earlier about Shivang Sharma's paper, how shareholders operationalize responsible AI in data sensitive contexts. And that there were these rifts in AI that they found very commonly would take place: safety, humanity, accountability, reliability, and equity. And that Shivang's policy recommendation was to implement mandatory participatory design process across all phases of AI development. I 100% agree, and I would like to see how can that be achieved. How can that transparency be achieved, and how can we differentiate what a decolonial participatory design looks like versus a colonial participatory design? And I wanted to hear your thoughts, and would love to go forth and network more with regards to everyone here, because I think the work that everyone's doing is incredibly important. And so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really useful input. I don't know if Cynthia or Elvie have thoughts on that.
I'd like Jamil, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, to go first. I think
yeah,
they've been waiting for a minute, and then I think we can address. Sorry.
Thank you, Elvie. I'm very happy to see you here because as a part of the organizing committee, I came across your content and I said, we have to get Elvie. So, but I know that the network was already aware and engaging with your content, but I'm happy to see that my excitement spilled over into your presence. So just a couple of things is that that I thought about, and thank you for your presentation. Thank you for both your presentations, but I'll start with Elvie, is the importance of how we balance the conversation between the urgency of action and sitting with history. Because I feel like those two actions are often pitted against each other as an either or. If we're looking at history, then we're not being urgent. If we're being urgent, then history becomes irrelevant. And for me, it's been I think one of the stumbling blocks, just in terms of a sense of people being arrested by this current moment, arrested by the urgency, arrested by the direness, is in fact a result of long genealogies of epistemicide that have quite literally buried knowledges and carriers of that knowledge. And when I say quite literally, you know, I mean those mines in Congo come to mind, because literally just it looks like a grave, you know. And this has been happening throughout. And something I often think about, I talk about how I'm a mid-millennial, so I'm a part of a generation that knows what it's like to not have any of this technology and then have your life completely overrun by it. But I remember a time before. And then now realizing that the conversation regarding Congo and the extraction of precious minerals in relation to an Apple conversation and a Microsoft conversation that exists primarily in conversations about my computer battery and phone battery, realizing that in fact I had participated in this the day I got my first cell phone, right? Without knowing, because this history of extraction is a part of a much larger genealogy that precedes me. And so I think it's important for us to realize that this did not jump up out of nowhere, and that we are now suddenly faced with this very urgent global political moment that we simply can't, we just don't have any idea where it came from. I think it's important for us to disrupt that thinking, because there are answers in that. There are answers in that towards and what now? And then also your point about the impact of Rwanda as a state's participation and advancement of this kind of violence, and Rwanda being particularly significant historically for having for being in some ways in recent memory introduced to the world through the very act of genocide, and one of the most unbelievable and gruesome iterations of that. Just by the sheer fact that the amount of people who were killed in the time period that the genocide endured for, in fact, in comparison to a genocide like the Holocaust that is often spoken about as the standard of genocide, would have far exceeded. And so one is for us to realize also that decolonization is also about holding ourselves accountable, because it is by now not exclusively a European project. And that the tendency towards doing that, even though it's important, can sometimes make us obscure the responsibilities that we have in this moment. And then lastly, just to say to Cynthia, when you shared that slide about the definition of intelligence, and one of the elements of that definition was the capacity for comprehending general truths. And even in that statement, the fact of a general truth or a truth at all is in fact a construction, right? Because who decides that this is what now qualifies as the truth? And for many of us who are generational victims of empire, what we now talk about as indigenous knowledges and knowledges that we hold about ourselves and our existence in this world at some point was an untruth, right? According to an official script. What we are now, at some point in history, what we are saying now are blatant lies, right? And so even now, one of the biggest contentions about artificial intelligence, as it's called, is the integrity of the truth that it can convey. And in fact, sometimes the bypassing and the exploitation of truth to create alternate realities. But it requires of us, and so to bring both of your presentations together in a way, is it requires of us to participate, not to throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, this threat is coming our way and we don't know what to do about it. And with that said, is to realize that we have inherited the tools and the technologies, as you have both so beautifully laid out, to be able to do that participation in a meaningful way that actually makes impact and in some ways, hopefully moves towards the future that we would like to see. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So many useful points there. I appreciate that acting urgently and engaging history can't be seen as either or. Also that you brought in the term epistemicide. I think a lot of times we're not actually viewing killing of knowledges as literal violence that eventually also leads to violence of bodies from the systems they carry forward. And the idea too that we can't actually extract ourselves from systems of extraction no matter where we are. So the accountability piece everywhere, it looks differently for everyone, but applies to all of us. And I love that last point about like the capacity for understanding truths and thinking too about like, is truth just about objective facts that are on the internet that AI can give us, or about the value frames that collectively allow us to make sense of facts, which also goes back to Robin's point about like participatory design processes. So I'll give it to Elvie maybe first if you have any comments on any.
Going back to the question that Robin proposed, which basically is kind of like a question of like integration, right? Can we work within the system? Can we trust what the system does and what it gives? And I just speaking for myself, this is not a fact. This is my belief. You know, I think it would be hard to believe that these systems which are created for their self-preservation, to continue extraction, to continue exploitation, to continue mass profiting, that they would act in any way that would lessen that. So even when we think about companies like Apple, for example, right, who claim to have certificates of I forgot what they explicitly call it, but any these certificates that they say ensure that the minerals that they source from Congo are conflict free. There is no verifiable way to determine that. When you are on the ground and you look at the mines and the way that artisanal miners work, the pool in which they work and the places in which they mine and where they dig for the minerals, oftentimes they're right next to or in the same pool as some of these larger, more structured mines. So it could be all going into the same pot at the end of the day. There's really no way of verifying that, right? But I think we have to recognize and be very sober in our dealings with certain institutions and know that they will create anything that sounds good, that sounds as if it's working in a way that's equitable, when we have histories of examples that's not true. And it connects back to the point that that Jamil made about the difference or the conflict that people feel between looking at history and moving with urgency towards the future. And I would recommend that folks read chapter 3 of The Pitfalls of National Consciousness by Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth, because I think he really, really lays out for us the mistake that we make when we move with urgency to replace and reject, and we don't do the homework in really understanding what is it that we're working with, what is our intention, what do these systems want for themselves, and how are they negotiating with us, right? Because oftentimes we're the ones who are having to make concessions, we're the ones having to give up XYZ. We're not making terms and deals on our own terms because we have yet to really establish concrete principles and foundations in which we won't work with certain people and what we're willing to suffer with as a result of not making those particular deals. So I think we need to move in a way where we start thinking more critically of what we're willing to give up to ensure that sometime in the future we get what it is that we want out of this world and out of these institutions. But I find it very, very hard because we have had so many examples that we cannot continue to trust these institutions. We can't continue to trust these responsible practice, whatever document that they put out. If we even look at the peace accord that was recently signed between the US, Rwanda, and Congo, it's an entire sham. It's an economic deal that is presenting itself and parading itself as a peace agreement when nothing in the peace agreement talks about justice for the victims of genocide. Nothing about it talks about justice for children who are forced to mine, for women who are forced to mine, for men who are forced to mine. Nothing in it talks about the integration and centers the civic community within Congo, who have their own recommendations on how to move forward, who have recommendations on how to work within the context of armed groups, work within the context of mineral resource exploitation. They're not centered in that deal at all. So it's really about these states and what their desires are and what their greed dictates. And it's just hard for me to fall in line with that without being sober and critical.
Thank you. Yeah, beautifully said. And thanks also for the resource recommendation. I think for the sake of time, maybe we'll have one more. I see Nikos, if you want to come in.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to build off something that Elvie mentioned in terms of, I think you mentioned Apple's, whatever it's called, the conflict-free certification or whatever it is. And as you were stating, it's like, obviously, this is completely disconnected from the human realities here, as well as the more than human realities. You know, when we talk about conflict, it's like conflict for who? Because the imposition of a mine is indicative of ecocide. I mean, the conflict and decimation that more than human species, literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, are pitted against when that happens, is inherently a form of conflict. So when we think about these things, not only is it inherently a human conflict that is completely swept under the rug and not recognized as such, but there's a million other conflicts happening at the same time when you zoom out there. But I also think this brings up a wider point about how sinister so-called sustainability certifications are. I mean, it's this very complex international money laundering scheme, basically another form of colonialism. There was a recent article I was looking at. I can read just an excerpt from it, but picture Maria, a coffee farmer in Honduras whose family has intercropped beans, squash, and maize between coffee plants for 5 generations. This year, her buyer requires regenerative certification. The cost, a $500 grower fee, $1,000 for mandatory training workshops, plus travel, and ongoing audit expenses that will consume her entire annual premium if she's lucky. The cruel irony, the regenerative practices they're teaching her are simplified versions of the MILPA system her Lenca ancestors perfected over millennia, but without certification from a northern entity, her coffee is just commodity. With it, Ernesto Illy in Italy can charge 30 euros per kilogram in Milan, while Maria receives an extra 10 cents per pound before fees. This is regenerative agriculture's dirty secret. It's not innovation, it's intellectual property theft dressed as sustainability. So, reminded me of that.
Amazing. Such a useful and illustrative example. I know we're almost out of time, but Sarah, maybe if you have a short comment.
Very short. I'd put it in the chat, but Nikos, is just to build on what Nikos just said. There's a video called Conservationism is Colonialism, and I would encourage people to watch it. And it kind of talks about like these systems and practices that of conservation that so many communities, because you're part of the ecosystem, right? It's part of your way of knowing and understanding the world. Then you have this colonial framing that tells you no, you need to extract from the majority of your land, and then you cordon off a piece that you say is protected, and then you make the people who have been living in that space the enemy. You bring whiteness as a protector of these animals because animals are very separate from humans, and it's this whole system. And so I think it was a really interesting conversation around that. So it just kind of builds on what Nico said. So I would encourage y'all to check out the link. I put it in the YouTube in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you. So since we're coming at the hour and I want to give a few moments for a survey at the end, I just wanted to say a huge, huge thank you to our speakers today. I felt really inspired and genuinely sparked a lot of food for thought for me, and I'm sure for everyone here. And it was really beautiful to see the ways your conversations wove together and covering so many far-reaching topics. Thank you also to everybody in this room who shared bits of your wisdom. I won't attempt to summarize and reduce the nuance of what was there, but hopefully we are all taking some kind of questions or inspiration or even just feelings that can take us into other parts of our life from this. I just wanted to highlight that this is the last of the like foundational sessions in preparation for D20 week. So the first session of that week will kick off on Monday, 17 November, titled Beyond Aid from Dependency to Justice, looking at the state of aid systems and their relationship to coloniality. So if you haven't already, you can go to the D20 website. I'm sure someone has, or we'll drop that in the chat as well, and you can register for all of the sessions. And you also can learn more, I think, somewhere on the website about joining the Decoloniality Network as a collaborator or participating member if you're interested in some of these ideas and topics and continuing to engage with them. But with that, I want to ask just for the last 2 minutes, we would appreciate so much if you could stay to just take a short survey that helps inform the rest of how we organize these sessions and work of Decoloniality Network going forward. So I believe, Nikos, if you dropped that in the chat.
Yes,
There's a Google form there. And yeah, I know sometimes you forget about it if you don't do it in the moment. So if you're able to click on it now and do it, that would be incredible. But as you do that, yeah,